Thank you so much, PM Square team. Very excited to be here with you this morning and to dive into our Trifacta workshop. So without further ado, let's just get into it. Let me get some of my controls out of the way here. All right, hopefully my screen is coming through. And again, welcome to everyone who's attending this session today. I'm really excited to share the power of Trifacta with you this morning. What I'd like to do is kind of level set and give you kind of an overview of what we're going to cover in this in the next couple hours, and then we'll walk it through. So, quick overview of the agenda for this. I'd really like to start with some basic concepts and introduce you to the major mechanisms and the core foundational principles of Trifacta, and kind of give a broad overview of the things involved in a beginning to end scenario of working with the platform. Stemming from that, we'll then actually get into a real life use case workshop. Might be a little bit on the vanilla side, but we we've all experienced that. Sometimes simple and direct translates into being very efficient and powerful. So the idea is that this particular use case will help us see the major type of foundational steps that you might work with Trifacta, such as how to source from multiple data sources, doing some blending and joining of that data, and then taking advantage of some of the smart functionality that's built into the platform. And we'll see just how easy it is, and how, as our prior speakers have already mentioned, it's really more of a UI focused, user experience focused data transformation platform rather than code based. And it's a shift in model, but it's really interesting. I think you're going to find it very exciting. So let's get into it. First thing we'll start talking about are some of the core concepts, and one of the more foundational ones is this data wrangling and data preparation. And just kind of a recap, I know our CEO Adam gave a fantastic keynote yesterday, kind of about the genesis of Trifacta and some of the things that have gone into contributing to making Trifacta kind of the leader in this space right now, and where the initial issues were. Let me actually put this in presentation mode so you can see this just a little bit better. So again, the concept here of data wrangling is not necessarily a new one. Coming from the BI and analytics space, I've been in that for well over 2 decades. The idea is that we're doing a lot of different machinations and adjustments and alignments to work with data. Sometimes coming from different types of sources, sometimes different structures, and we have to contextualize and we have moving targets that the data needs to be utilized for. So this process, as we know, can often be cumbersome. It's often not efficient or involving just one person. There's access issues, data security issues, and then just the mechanisms and platforms that we work in, they're not necessarily tuned to be efficient towards the mode that we need when we're working with the data preparation. So as we work through this process, we see that the biggest factor that kind of hits us here is time, and really in the subtext there is efficiency. And as one of the things that I personally kind of note is the validation piece at the end of this process, which can is fraught with a lot of adjustments, alignments. The validation piece is really what allows us to see all the steps that we've taken so far. Has that really gotten us to where we're trying, our proper target? And then, once we go through a validation and a QA, then we got to go back and readjust and work on our process again. And so, data wrangling, where Trifacta comes in, is let's really, shorten up that time, make it very efficient, and give you the tools along the way to help that validation kind of occur in step with everything that you are evolving and building in the course of building your data pipeline. And that really hits that 80% of the time where we spend working on just getting the data ready. I'd be willing to bet that nearly everyone here on the call today is well versed in Excel, just because of that singular purpose, right? It's just aligning and organizing data and cleaning things up. And again, it's not governance oriented, it's not efficient, it's not translatable, it's not shareable often. And so the idea, again, is with Trifacta, as we work through this and build our pipeline and work through the UI, we get great data profiling, which shows us at every decision point, the step that we're about to take, you're informed. You have an idea of, what's the range of my data? What's the quality of that data? And so as you start building in your logic, that complements the decision step that you're making there, and then allows you to get to your endpoint in that validation and check that very, very quickly. So we're going to see that in action today. Okay, so that's one of the critical things here about data wrangling. It's this overall process, and Trifacta is really focused on making that democratized and proliferating this for anyone who wants to use it. So where does Trifacta fit into your overall landscape? I like this slide because it's really powerful, and it shows you just like where Trifacta brings its greatest value. We're not reinventing data platforms. We're not talking about, we're not trying to restore your data or restructure it, for super large data structures. I mean, there's best of breed platforms out there, in terms of databases and different apps, and the Internet of Things is producing all kinds of data and all kinds of different structures. And the idea is that Trifacta allows you to effectively connect to those sources, right? It's source agnostic. And then on the other side of the house, especially in the analytics space, there are a ton of applications and platforms out there that, again, are super highly specialized, as the industry has been pushing them forward in order to do like your reporting or your analytics or your AI or ML type of implementations now is in that new segment. But the idea is that Trifacta helps you build this data pipeline in the middle. And that's really where the power is, because in that pipeline, you now have the ability to have a continuous structure. And this structure is something that's repeatable. It's modular, so each piece builds upon the one prior. Thinking about this horizontal motion here, you can connect to or discover one or multiple data sources, either individually or simultaneously as you're working through something. You examine that structure, you can, slice and dice through that, you can recombine that. There's cleaning involved, of course. For example, we might have data formats that are, sometimes in European formats, some might be in US format or different, currencies. You might have, formats for addresses. There's a whole host of things that you have to kind of manually change up in order to get, a harmonization and a blending, a cleanliness of your data. So Trifacta is really set up to let you do that efficiently and very, very quickly. In addition, the augmentation of that data or enriching it, you can, blend or merge or look up or, basically make that data much more powerful and bring in your secret sauce or your specializations that will really make this, the data, it'll give those outputs that you're producing, that's where the value is. And the mechanisms that you're building here through Trifacta really help you to accelerate and add some serious value to that. And then, of course, the key piece is the validation. Again, you see information all along the way here, but then there's an actual validation of your outputs where you can profile your entire data set that you've been working on. And we're going to see just how powerful that is and how informant that is to all the prior steps. And what I like about that is you can get to that very quickly, often in minutes and hours, if you're really like working through something rather than weeks and months, or even multiple days. And that's extremely powerful because now you can get onto the business of actually doing something with that data. It's true intent in terms of the analysis space. And then, of course, the deployment. That's the final piece to basically put some wheels on it and get it, get the data and get your outputs to where they need to go. And you have multiple avenues and options of how you want to deploy. And also for orchestration and scheduling and different capabilities there. So we'll touch a little bit on those things as we get into the platform itself. So that's kind of the horizontal motion. And again, another call out here is as you work through this pipeline that you're building, you might get to the point where you're doing some validating and you suddenly discover that, hey, I missed something. There was an outlier in my data. I need to go back and allocate or adjust or accommodate that. You can easily go back into your logic that you're building, make that adjustment, and then rerun that process. And again, that's not a huge lift because the way Trifacta is built and structured. So, and even in the process of, let's say, you're enriching your data and you realize that, hey, this could be, we're doing A and B, but it would be extremely powerful if we could add in X and Y as well. Well, you can augment that process, immediately. There's no reason to not be able to do that. And that's another, the flexibility and the modularity and kind of the assembly process that you have with this platform really makes it quite powerful. And then kind of a vertical motion that I like to call out here is, again, the different roles and people in your organization who might be part of this data pipeline building process. From a data analyst to a data scientist or a data engineer, oftentimes have different skill sets or different context to what they're trying to do with the data. That being the case, people are going to have different lenses of what they're going to be contributing to this process or what they're trying to get out of it. And that's the other part of it. Every one of these roles, the UI is accessible to them. You might have somebody who's highly specialized in writing Python or R or understands SQL, or you might just have a data consumer. They have an idea of their data and they understand it in the tabular format, but beyond that, it's like, they're trying to understand how I take this and take A and turn it into B. Trifacta is clean enough, it's direct enough, it's organized and simple enough as a UI, which allows something even that what we'll call of a smaller scope of a process versus something very, very highly complex. And we'll see that when we talk about the flow structures a little bit. For example, in that latter case, it would be something like a data scientist or a data engineer really doing some kind of complex merging and joining and enriching of your data. So again, from a vertical structure, you can have different ownership segments within here and things can be handed off. You can share logic, you can reuse chunks of that logic, so you can build upon each other's work and their own insights and their own capabilities. And so again, it's kind of that modular reassembly process. So when you start thinking about kind of this horizontal and vertical intersection, and then, through multiple dimensions and context there, suddenly you have a very, very complete and powerful platform that allows you to do quite a lot. And from a training and learning standpoint, it's a few things that, few key concepts that you need to learn, and it's about modalities of those things. And as you start implementing that, you really start to exponentially grow your value and your effectiveness and capabilities with the platform. So again, kind of speaking a little to the UI and just what, why we have such a great adoption and acceleration of this. Here's a quick snapshot of the UI, and it looks very similar to Excel. It's a tabular format. It's rows and columns, and there's a familiarity with it. Although you will see clearly here that there's some augmentation to it as well in terms of our data quality bar and some histograms at the top of each one of these columns. And we'll get into that here as we get into the UI into more detail. Additionally, as I said about the data profiling and giving you information along the way when you make your decision points, it really allows you to understand data you're not familiar with. In this case, we're highlighting a column called event time, and it tells you the overall quality of the data. So there's a specific count and a percentage count of the validity or something that's mismatched. Perhaps it's not matching the same data type that is expected for that particular column of data. It also tells you what portion is missing, so that's also powerful. Because just even in these top three things alone, if I did nothing else, imagine just simply taking everything in your data landscape and being able to profile it this completely to understand where are my gaps, where are we missing, what's not aligned. This segment alone is, I would say, worth its weight in gold. I mean, this is the foundation of, we want to build an EDW, or we want to put something out on the cloud, or we want to do, subsections and contextualize data and have some like information out there for people to utilize. So, I mean, again, and that's just at the top of this. As we move through this, it also tells you kind of a different orientation of the histogram, your unique values. So you can see kind of it checks through patterns and it sees, also patterns here. But it also tells you where are my key values, where's my collections and groupings, and then you have that distribution of your data to see where I have your most incidence of something or particular outliers or gaps. So again, just within here, there's a ton of information for you to start understanding and really getting a handle on your data and understanding, well, what's the next step here? Do I need to clean up the mismatched, or do I need to work on different patterns in here? So again, lots of information there for you to take advantage of. One of my favorite things about this, and I've been teaching analytics and BI tools for a very, very long time, is this instantaneous preview capability that Trifacta has, because this absolutely eliminates the guesswork out of what you're doing. And this is why This is another key reason why you don't have to bring a coder's mindset to this. It's just about visual inspection of your data. In this particular case, you can see that I've got some information here in the item column, and it's actually 2 columns of data that have been merged together, and I want to actually segment them and separate them. So it's as easy as, in this case, I brush over the dash, which is the separator there, and on the right-hand side, the system reacts with giving me some suggestions on what you'd like to do. And those suggestions are ML driven. So over time, Trifacta will start to understand your data, what you do with it, what your preferences are, and these suggestions tend to get a little bit smarter, meaning the ones you tend to use more often will surface towards the top. And the nice thing about this is as you hover over a particular segment here, for example, this one, the split on values matching, as it's highlighted in blue, you see to the right of the column in question, this preview, and this shows you in real time, like if I were to make that selection and say add to my logic here, my recipe, what's that going to look like? So there's no guesswork to say, well, is this going to turn out right or wrong, or having to wait till the end to execute this job to know whether that that decision was correct for what you're trying to do here. You'll see a real live preview of it. And this is one of the key differentiators in Trifacta. You see this in real time. And again, this list that's generated is not the exhaustive list. This is not your discrete list of options. There's so many more things that you can do here. You can call them directly. This is just kind of an accelerator to help you go along the way of building out your logic. Over time, you kind of feel like you're on Amazon and you're browsing products, and you're kind of then saying, well, I want to choose this, and now picking sizes or picking colors. It's more of a configuration mentality versus a coding one. And that's a great foundation for being able to, why this is so adaptable and why it proliferates at organizations, because the training curve is pretty small once you get the foundation and the basics down. But again, a really key important point here where you get these instantaneous previews. Well, again, hands down my favorite feature of this. And then the other key part of this is there's a natural language recipe. So once you've actually built that logic into what we call a recipe, you can read this. It says here split items on a delimiter where it matches that delimiter into 2 columns. So there's no code, there's no particular syntax. You don't have to be really highly technically aligned in order to understand this or to share this or to kind of repurpose this, to look through this and say, hey, there's somebody had built out 5 steps here, and I think it's pretty close to what I'm trying to do. Maybe if I change 2 steps and add 1 more, that's what I'm trying to do. So again, you can build upon the logic and the knowledge that you've already got built into the organization, where you've got some successes and you've got some value in there. And so again, that ability to share that language and share that knowledge is really, really critical. And again, a great accelerator. All right. What I'd like to do now is to step into high-level overview. This is, the 30,000-foot view of how Trifacta works. And again, just call out some of the key elements here that are in motion. So first of all, what I'll call out to you is that we'll kind of look at this from, I guess, the left side here. You have information stored out there, and in this particular case, we've got this cloud image around here, but your data does not have to live in the cloud exclusively. It could be on-premise, it could be a file on your local machine, whatever. And the other call out here is that it can be in multiple formats. It doesn't have to be in an organized, like a database format. It could just be a file storage, or it could be a blob, or it can be something unstructured. Trifacta is, again, source agnostic, and it'll connect to just about anything. We've got a lot of different connectors and capabilities out there, which I'll highlight some of those once we step into the UI. The other key thing to call out here is Trifacta can also, it's out there and it's a proper, it's on the cloud, so you can just connect to it through a browser. And that's a great feature, because now I don't have to go and do desktop installs and work through like security or IT, or like, the burden of having to, like, if I've got 5,000 users, that's a lot of time to get an application installed for all of them in an organization. But it's very easy to send an email and here's a URL, go log into it and connect. So that deployment model makes it super easy. And a user just logs into that with their ID, and then they're connected to Trifacta. And so again, here, as they connect in, Trifacta is what we do is we make kind of a virtual pointer to these different sources of data. And the advantage here is that those kind of they're modular, and it allows you to reuse them. So I could have, these top 2 users, they're pulling maybe from the tables, and the bottom 3 are pulling from the files and tables. Well, Trifacta only really needs to go and make that connection once. And then as the users work through this, they can piggyback on top of that same virtual connection without Trifacta having to make an individual thread or alignment for every one of these users. So there's a nice abstraction and segmentation there, and kind of again an acceleration of things you've already built upon, and just take advantage of that value. So another key element here is that when a user starts interacting with that data, Trifacta pulls samples of that data. So let's say if the data happens to be very, very small, 10,000, 100,000 rows of data, it's not going to, it'll likely pull that data in. But this is especially, samples become critical in cases of where we're talking like extremely large data sets, multiple terabytes or larger, things of that nature. So what happens is Trifacta pulls samples, and you see here there's some different stratifications indicated by the different color bands in this data set, and you see that ultimately in the browsers of these users, they're looking at different samples. And that is something that I'll talk about here in more detail. You have the ability to choose what type of sample you want to pull from your data sources. And the whole modality around sampling, I tend to think of it this way. And like, for example, right now, unfortunately, the world is dealing with the COVID pandemic. And a critical thing that we're trying to do is to understand populations and, like in subpopulations and the rate of infection there. It's really untenable in a lot of places to be able to go and actually test everyone at this in a time span enough where it's going to be give you some degree of accuracy of that infection rate. So what we do is we test some subset of that population, and then there's mathematical models. Then you extrapolate and say, here's the rate of infection, here's the rate of how many people are having it, or the rate of reduction. And so those models allow you to kind of think about that system in miniature, but the mathematics allow you to understand it at the larger scale. And then, and that's kind of the, a modality here, at least from the mathematical perspective of what these samples are aiming to do. It allows you to work on your data in kind of this miniature subset. And then at runtime, when you're ready to go, that's when Trifacta will go and work against your full data set. So at this point, the users, they're in here, they've built their logic, and they've said, if I've constructed this logic, and now I'm going to go send that to Trifacta. I say go. Trifacta runs that to the execution engine, and at this point in time, it will then go and read and execute against that full entire data set using the optimization of the resources and the scaling. And this is really one of those great segmentations where you get that acceleration of time to value, because you're not bogging down the users with having to worry about the pipeline of bringing all your data over, having to run through rows and rows of data to check validations. You can do this within minutes, and then as this runs, whatever execution time, it comes out with that profile, as I said at the very end, that validation. And you may find that something was, again, an outlier, was not considered. Well, you can go back and redo that, because now you have visibility to what that is. And this process is, even having to do it in multiple iterations, is still more efficient and effective than doing it with the full data set in one swoop. So again, the sampling is a key critical element in here. And this also allows the browser to give you those instantaneous previews and to work through the logic that you want to build there. I want to dig in just a little bit on the sampling, because again, this is a critical piece, and it's important to understand how this works. So again, here's a scenario where I've got 1 trillion records. A user will come into Trifacta to work on this data. They want to do contextualize it, do something with it. And what we're going to do here is, in that initial scan, you can do a quick or a full scan. It brings in about 100,000 records. Okay. And so what happens is, as I work through those 100,000 records, I start out, maybe I do some logic steps like a replace or split, filter, and finally I do a sum. I've got some kind of aggregate or something down here. And at this point, I can see in my UI, I'm down to 10 records. At this point, 10 records is certainly not representational enough of a trillion records in order to make decisions going forward on how to clean up or manipulate or build some logic into that data set there. So what I need to do here is I need to tell Trifacta, hey, let's go refill my bucket of data that I'm working on here in my sample so I can continue working and complete the logic that I need to build here. So the important element is that you can, at any given time, call an additional sample of data. You can do it multiple times as you're building your logic. And in this case, after step number 4, when I tell Trifacta, hey, let's go refill our bucket again of with some new data, this sample B is cognizant of these prior steps. So at this point in time, it's not just going and getting some random data. It's getting data based on the lens of the prior steps that have happened. And in this sense, this particular sample B is contextualized, with respect to the prior steps that have happened. And now I've got a refilled bucket, and now I can go on and continue doing my work. The other thing about the samples is you can switch between them once you've taken a sample, and you can kind of look at, lens number 1, lens number 2, and so you can kind of switch back and forth between them or multiple samples if you have that on that data set in order to see, has this logic missed anything? So you can kind of overlay different views to see the effectiveness or the efficiency or completeness of what you've built. But the key element here, the takeaway, is that samples that you pull at the point in time you pull them are context aware of the steps that you've done. And that's a critical feature. And again, a differentiator and an accelerator for Trifacta. We'll see that in action as we go here. These are the different types of samples that you're able to pull. Again, random samples, some of these, in terms of efficiency, will run faster than others in terms of their initial generation. First rows, for example, is probably the most efficient because it's literally, just reading the data in order. Random sampling, you can do filter-based, find specific values in a column. This allows you, it's akin to doing like a where clause in a SQL statement or, filter step. You can do this here in the UI. Once you have an initial data set, if, for example, you don't have the means to do that filtering on the acquisition of that data, which we also have, and I'll show you that later. But this kind of gives it to you post ingestion of that data. Anomaly based, which is really interesting and cool, mismatched or missing values across your different columns of data. Stratified, row for every distinct value in a particular column, and that's really quite powerful. And it will probably take a little bit of time to generate if you're running over a trillion records, but when I say a little bit of time, I'm talking, I'm not talking hours and days. It's it's minutes often, but still the value of this is if I'm making decisions on that column, if it's a critical column, each one of my logic steps, my degree of accuracy and certainty that I've covered at all my bases there is quite high. And then of course cluster based, for example, if I'm in a large data environment like a Hadoop or Hive, I have my data co-located in different places on different clusters. I can designate, pull from cluster A or cluster B, etc. So again, you can mix and match these or employ different ones as needed depending on your particular context. So hopefully by now I'm starting to paint this picture of why I love Trifacta so much. Its efficiency, self-service, and really, really powerful. And I'm going to show, convince you of that even more in this next segment here. All right, so we're going to get into the use case workshop and do a quick time check. Okay. In this use case workshop, this is the information that we've sent along to you, and there are some instructions in there in one of the documents, and I'm going to be following that along. The data sets that you're going to need are already inside of our training environment that hopefully you've all registered for, and we'll be working in there. So I'll go slow enough so that everyone can follow along, and also know that if you kind of fall behind or something, there are those steps listed in that PDF document for you to follow through. And in addition, as we go along this, I'm going to show you some off-menu items, which I think are really powerful and quite important to kind of understand and just see the breadth and the scope of the type of things that you can do. Before we do that, I'd actually like to just give you an overview of the exercise itself and explain the different segments of what we're going to do, because as we're working through it, we'll probably reference back to this in a couple times just to kind of ground those concepts and those ideas there. So the first thing, again, please make sure your Chrome browser is up to date. Hopefully it is automatically. And this is our training environment. Disclaimer, this is a free training environment, number one, which is great. Second disclaimer, it is a public training environment. I mention that because we occasionally, in order to keep this thing up to date in terms of software versions, we'll go and clean it out. So any work that you might have on there, please make sure you take some backups, and that will be valuable for you later on. If we do a refresh, so if you don't want to lose it. The other thing I would say is that, again, because this is a public space, be careful about putting anything proprietary or important out there. I would really, again, big disclaimer, mention that this is really just more for kind of a test drive, kick the tires, kind of, I just want to try something out functionally kind of environment. But again, it's available out here for you. Okay.
Well, we had a question from the audience, if you don't mind me asking.
Yeah,
quickly.
please.
So the question was, if a file that you receive on a consistent basis has a change in the structure of the file somewhere, can the recipe be adjusted for files moving forward, but not files in the past?
Great question. Short answer, yes. There are ways to understand and read, what you would have to build it into your process, but you can anticipate if there is a change to kind of bifurcate, for old files versus new files. In addition, we have the ability to do parameterization. So if there's some kind of indicators in the file naming or the file location itself that you could use as a trigger to indicate, channel A or channel B for the logic, you can utilize that as well. So again, we have structures that would allow you to do that. So yeah, great question. Any others before we move into this next segment?
That's it for now. Thank you, Vipul.
Okay, great. All right, so the segments that I'd like to review here with you, these again are kind of, if you remember that data pipeline when I showed the earlier slide between where the data lives and where it's going, these are the structures and mechanisms that you work through. The thing that I'll call out here is that every one of these, this is not a kind of a one-way street, like a one-way door. Once you're done importing your data, then if you're in this great flow, you can move back and forth between these, left and right. It's not just left to right. You can skip around a little too if you need to. So again, these are iterative, these are modular, and you can reorder a new structure as you need to. Okay? But this is the standard kind of, if I'm coming from absolute beginning to an endpoint, the mechanisms that you're ultimately moving through. So let's talk a little bit about these. So import data set. A little bit of a misnomer because it's not actually an importing of your data set. I'll say this, Trifacta is not replicating your data. We're not in the business of storing your data, right? We're basically just doing a virtual pointer to your data, reading it and putting it wherever you want to put it. So again, we're not replicating your data. We're not, okay? So it's a reference to that. Once that reference has been made, it gets put into your library. And you can, again, it's like, think about it like, a bucket of Legos. Now that I've kind of got those, I can reassemble and reuse those and source them in multiple ways for different things that you might want to build. And again, here's just a small sample of the different types of files that you can go against or data sources that you can go against. Again, there are definitely more, but just to kind of show you a bit of the range. And one of the things that I'll call out here kind of tucked at the bottom is you can reference results of another Trifacta job. So what this means is it's called a reference data set, and I'll show you how to make one later. The idea here is that when you produce an output from all of this stuff that you build in Trifacta, you can actually make that a referenceable, logical data structure. You don't even have to store it anywhere. That can be then used as a starting point for another process. And you can use that in concert with other ones just like that, or in concert with an actual data source. So that's really powerful in terms of giving you the ability to do some different layers of abstraction and segmentation of your data as well. Okay. And I'll show you how to make that super easy. The next thing that you would do once you have your data all available to start working with is you build what's called a flow. And a flow looks like this on the right-hand side. It's a screenshot from one of our sample use cases here. And you see the flow, the icon for it looks like these two squares in a circle. It's meant to emulate what you actually see when you're building a flow. I will call out for those who have tinkered with our more recent versions that this image is actually our older flow view, And we have well, say a more evolved one that is being becoming the new standard for us in future versions. So if you've seen that, just please know that this is the predecessor to that newer version. And if you haven't seen it, for all intensive purposes, just keep this image in mind. You'll see the new one, and you'll have a foundation to understand, kind of what the pieces are in play. The main thing is to just understand how we read this. So kind of from left to right, these are my data sources, and I can tell that they're sources because of their location, number one, and number two, the icons, which, as we go through this, keep an eye to those things. They're informative of, the different pieces you're working on. So here I've got these dog-eared pages, which tells me that there's some local files, likely CSV files. And here in this flow, these two files, for example, 1 and 2, they get merged together in a recipe. This recipe looks like a scroll. And that's where all of the logic that I have for these data sets lives. So there's some kind of merging going on here. And then this third data set, there's also some other logic. And then that particular output then gets blended into these two data sets at the top. And then there's an output here. For example, I knew that because of the two icons here. And we'll dig into these in more detail later on as well when we get to the run job portion of our example. The next thing that I'll call out is building a recipe. When we talked about a flow can have one or multiple data sets, and a data set can have one or multiple recipes. And a recipe is just like what you think of, like when you think of, a recipe for pumpkin pie. It's the fall, we're all going to be having some recently, or maybe pecan pie if you're down here in Texas. But the idea is that it's literally a set of instructions that tells you what to start with, right? And then what order to do things with those ingredients, and then what your expected output is. And so in the same way, like in here, when we see this recipe, each one of these elements here is called a step. So in here, I have 7 steps. The critical thing to note about some of the recipe and their steps. All right, in some cases, the order in which you do the steps doesn't matter. So for example, in my recipe for that pumpkin pie, if I say preheat the oven, right? I could do that at the very, very beginning before I start mixing all of my ingredients, or I can kind of do it midway. Hey, I'm going to start mixing, and I'm going to actually let this sit a little because that's the secret. You have to actually let it just gel for a little while. And then, so maybe like after step number 3 in my set of instructions, then I'm going to go preheat the oven. Great. Net, your outcome will be the same because the order in which you did that preheat oven step didn't affect your net output. There are other, and so you'll see that there are examples of some steps that can happen like that. It can be asynchronous. Other ones have to happen in a particular series. For example, crack your eggs, put them in the flour. If you don't crack your eggs and you just throw them into the flour, you're going to have a very crunchy pie at the end of the day. If you're into that, it's not a problem. But if you're not, that could be very challenging for you. And so in that case, the order of that step mattered. So there are some steps, and the reason for the order mattering in that case is because you're anticipating the outcome of that step to be available to you to build upon for a step down the line. So again, in some cases, the order matters. The other thing that I'll mention is the number of steps that you have. Each one of these steps is an execution pass on your full data set in runtime. So think of it like this. If you're teaching a young child to tie their shoes, some people might explain how to do that in 5 steps. Some people might explain how to do that in 7 steps. Net, the child is learning to tie their shoes, but the one who does it in 5 steps might get done just a half a beat earlier and get to the playground faster, right? So again, you can ultimately get to that output, but the reduction in number of steps is also just a little bit more efficient. Now, that being said, in the beginning, when you start working with this platform, go for accuracy. In time, you'll start to learn how to make steps more efficient and nest multiple functions together. But from a performance perspective, I just want to plant that seed for you that number of steps will matter. And again, at the end of the day, if you need to do something in 10 steps, do it in 10 steps. Again, accuracy is the gold standard here. But again, just a couple call outs on the recipe. I will show you later on how to actually reuse this. Let's say the recipe, the logic that you have built in here is not specific for just data set A. Maybe you could use it for B, C, D, and G. I'll show you how to abstract that and use it in what's called a macro. So once we built that recipe again in miniature, now we're ready to go and run this on our full data set. So at this point, what we're going to do is run a job, and this is what generates that output for us. This is that point in time where Trifacta sends that logic to the execution engine and runs it against your full data set, that trillion records. And so what we do is we tell Trifacta to execute a job, and in that job, we can define the output. And we're able to say, Trifacta, I would like you to put the data here in this format or these multiple formats, and we'll see how we can set that up and structure that as well in our example. And then finally, most critically, the validation of our results. When I run a job, that one of the key things that I get is I'm able to profile the output. This profile is not against the sample data set, it's against the full data. This is really powerful because it tells me across the output that you've produced here, here's your data quality, here's your distribution of data. And this becomes important for me to say, hey, the process worked in the way that I expected. I now have metrics, I now have a profile of that data set, and it also helps you catch any particular outliers or things that were potentially in error that weren't anticipated. And then this is that point where you get that information and you can iteratively go back to the necessary layer in your data pipeline. For example, maybe we missed bringing in an additional data set that we needed because these lines lookup was missed. Or the logic didn't anticipate this in the cleaning step. We got to go back and there was a special character in there. Or I need to filter something out because actually this is too much of a range, right? I actually need a smaller data set. So all of these things you can glean from these profiles in your output, and that's quite powerful. You can, again, go back, make that adjustment, run it through again, and then revalidate. Okay, so that's the kind of the high-level overview of the process that we're going to undertake here. So we're going to get into the environment and start working on this. Okay, quick time check. I think I get to go to. All right, great. We're tracking well on time. All right, so what I've done here is I've logged into my training environment. Notice just the URL up here, and hopefully my screen is still being shared. Let me just check that. It is. Fantastic. Okay. Close this message. All right, so in the training environment here, let me close this. What I'd like to do is, first of all, give you an orientation of the things that we're looking at, and then we'll start getting into our use case. So the first thing that you'll note, if you're coming in here for the very, very first time, after you've registered, you probably won't see this screen. You'll probably see a pictogram of a little human sitting at a computer and it says, hey, welcome to Trifacta, and likely you're getting a prompt for a tour. Take the tour, it's pretty good. It won't be as good as the tour I'm giving you today, but it's still really good. But again, just kind of at a later point in time to reinforce the things that we're talking about today. So let's get oriented. The first thing is in the upper left. When I click on this, our icon, this always takes me back to the home screen, which is what we're looking at here. So if you ever get disoriented or kind of lost in the beginning, just click on this and come back to home base, and then you can kind of reformulate your path again. On this screen, there's a few things that I'll call out. Number one, it says, hey, welcome back. It knows who you are. It shows me the recent flows that I've been working on. Again, I can see that by the icon here on the left. Each one of the flow names is highlighted in blue. And as I hover over this line, you see that it kind of becomes clickable. Okay? And there's also a particular context menu for that line that I can call up. In this case, I can schedule this flow, share it, make copies, export this flow. And this is that step. If you do want to back up anything of yours, just to have in case things get refreshed, exporting is what you want to do. You can edit the name and description or delete the flow. In addition, if I click on something, I can jump back into that flow directly. Okay. Oops, let me go back to home screen. And down below, you'll see any recent jobs that you've run. Notice that each job is numbered individually. The higher numbers means that they're more recent. And I can, again, click onto the flow that job was run for, or I can click on a context menu for that flow. Here's a quick way to download logs. Probably not important when things are working great, but if something kind of goes wayward or you encounter any issues, these logs are important, and it's a very quick way to access them and download them. Okay. In addition, I've got the importing data button and create a flow button. They're out here because these are probably the first steps that you want to do. And I'm just going to kind of go back to our steps here. So importing data, create a flow. These are our foundational steps that we use in Tandem. So they're put out here as your first steps, to start a new process or an investigation or to build a new pipeline. We've also got some links out here for like what's new, different tutorials, help articles, different events and webinars, community site, and our Wrangle exchange, which I will talk about when we come back to the macro topic here a little bit later on. Okay, kind of going down the left-hand side again. If I click on flows, it takes me into a view for only the flows that I have. So again, notice the icon at the upper level. These are all the flows. I can create within here a flow or a folder. And I also see a context menu to import a flow. Remember what I said just a moment ago on the home screen. If you ever need to back anything up, you export that flow. This is the corollary to that operation in which you then import this back into this environment should your information be changed or you need to re-import it. Inside of here, I will call out a couple things. The option for creating a flow or a folder. So here you see an example flow that I built last week, a training example. You can tell by the flow icon. And over here, I have folders. Now, the folder structure, we introduced a couple versions ago, and a couple call outs on this, because these questions come up quite a bit in the training classes. We don't have the ability to do nested folders yet. It's just one level folder. And there's different ways to organize them. First and foremost, I will say inside of a folder is where you could build other flows. So I would come into here, I would create a flow, and they would all be under this folder number 1 called 1-data connections and align to data dictionary. Okay, you do not need to put flows inside of a folder. It's just a way for you to organize your flows and your data and your data structures that you're building. That being said, there's different ways of using the folder structure. Okay, one of them is people will sometimes just name, put a project name or a username as their on a folder. And so, like for example, Vipo will have all of the things that I built in here, or maybe it's project A, and then I have another folder for project B, and I'm doing different flows, doing different things at that level, and they're just kind of all grouped in there. How you want to build and structure that is entirely up to you. Here's a convention that I like to use, which helps me kind of build some abstraction layers in there and get some more versatility and modularity out of what I'm building. So the first thing is what I like to build a level 1 where, again, this is all optional, but just a kind of an off menu call out here. You can build flows that will connect to your data and maybe do a lot of the vanilla stuff that everyone is going to have to do down the line if they touch this data source. Things like aligning to your data dictionary, right? So this is like changing column names or putting dates in the right format or reducing, putting proper case for text values, removing white space or duplicate rows, things of that nature, right? Here I'm doing like just the real vanilla basic cleanup. I'm not doing anything that's like heavy duty logic. It's not super specialized. I'm not introducing like these crazy functions and doing mathematical or statistical derivations of my data. It's just real simple. I'm just getting the data, cleaning it up, and then just putting it out there. Right? This is that first Lego block. Then from the outputs of these steps, I would then have some other flows on top of that, which will now pull from here and start taking advantage of the work that's already been done. And here in the level 2 flows, I will start doing some data context and enrichment steps. So now I'm going to take these outputs and say, hey, I might have to do a join or a merge of the data, excuse me, or some type of lookup. I might be enriching my data by putting in our proprietary logic, because now we're going to expand this data set, or we're going to start contextualizing it or something. So there's, these are the steps now which are doing more of the molding and the shaping of that data. And then these again can be outputs. Again, at this level, there's still, whereas out of level 1, I may have had 10 people who would potentially use these outputs. Maybe out of level 2, now I'm down to maybe about 6, right? I'm moving in a particular direction with these. And then from those 6 outputs, again, these are just arbitrary numbers, I'm going to now go into my flows at level 3 that are going to now shape those files. Maybe out of those 6 files or those outputs, I'm going to take 3 of them and I'm going to really put in my specific business logic for this use case. I might do a couple aggregates, I might do a couple of one-offs where this has to merge with something else. And now, we're down to kind of getting a little bit more specialized, and maybe I'm producing 1 or 2 outputs. And now, only 1 or 2 people are going to use those outputs here for the level 4 flow, which will pick up from here and say, I'm going to do something very specific for this. We're going to send this over to an AI system or an ML algorithms that we want to test and run on our data to see, what's the output. So again, we're kind of going from bottom of pyramid to top of pyramid and becoming more specialized along the way. And in doing so, with each one of these lower level steps, we're able to take advantage of kind of the broad sweeping steps that Trifacta would do and kind of specialize and sharpen our data outputs as we get towards the top. The other advantage of this is it gives me the ability to segment from like kind of a processing or orchestration perspective what's happening here, and to also parallel, right? So there's different ways I can build in efficiencies here. And again, not a technical requirement. This is simply just a convention if you wanted to use that, okay? But that's the note on flows there. And again, you've got your context menu for folder, and you've got a specific one for your flows.
But one more quick question for you.
Please.
Is there a way to have a shared folder so that more than one user can view and work on flows?
Presently, no. Folders are specific to the user who's logged in here. But I would not be surprised if you saw that in a future release.
Great, thank you.
Yep, good question. The next segment that I'll talk about here is plans. And we'll actually come back to plans here in just a moment, but this is a way for us to create data pipelines and orchestrate them. And once we've built, well, let's jump into it. Now, we'll actually revisit this again later once we complete our output so we can see it in motion. So here, for a plan to be used, like if you think about all the different flows that we've got, right? I want to schedule this flow. And let's say I have multiple flows inside of here in my projects that they kind of work in tandem. They're not dependent on one another, but I need them to run in a particular sequence. That's what a plan is for. So it allows me to say, create a new plan. We'll call this test plan. And now I can start adding my flows. The flow is the granular level here that have outputs that will give me the ability to string these and orchestrate these together. And create that task, and now I would then be able to add another flow, but that flow needs to have an output. In this case, I've only got the one. So once we come back, we'll come back in here and add more to this. But the idea is that once you string together multiple flows, you can put an activation mechanism on here. So you can run it on a schedule, you can run it on a webhook to trigger it, APIs to pass in values, if your flow is accepting parameters, things of that nature. So you've got this whole orchestration capability built in here. And again, once we kind of build a couple things out, we'll come back in here and augment this so you can see it in action. But that's the concept of plans. The next thing I'll call out is our library. So a library has all of the information that you've made a connection to, some kind of virtual pointer, and it stores it for you to be able to reuse later. In this case, it's all the data. You can have imported data sets, which we've done here, any reference data sets, and we haven't made any yet, but we'll make one and we'll see it show up in here. And again, quick reminder, a reference data set is a data set that is the output of a flow or a job or a recipe inside of Trifacta flow. And then macros, which are kind of prepackaged, macro just the way we think of it in terms of VB or Excel. It's a kind of a black box of logic that, hey, run this macro and it's going to do one or n number of steps on my data and produce some kind of output. So they tend to be a little bit more generic, variable driven, dynamic. And we'll actually see how we make one and how we can utilize that and kind of the pros and cons of each. All right, and then down here you have jobs. And the jobs pane shows you all the different jobs that you have run. And again, each one has a context menu for downloading a log. You can see what's completed, failed, so on and so forth. If I click into a particular job, and we'll see this at the end of our example, you can see what's happened here. It gives you an overview of what the job has done, the different output destinations. So in this case, we're on AWS backbone here. So I've got an S3 bucket with my output that I can download directly. There's a profile of my data, which I talked about earlier. Okay, and again, this is the entire data set. And notice here I can download this profile as a PDF or as a JSON file. The advantage of downloading it as a JSON, I can re-import this as a JSON into another flow, and I could do that for multiple outputs. And now I can actually start making a factory to do kind of an operational dashboard if I want, analytics lens here, on how all of my data is doing every day or where it's coming from, right? And I can kind of see that at a more holistic level of my information systems in general. Got different dependencies, so it shows me what's gone into producing that output, and then the different data sources, it enumerates them. Okay, so there's a lot of information there in that job output, and we'll come back to that. We'll see how we came to that. Down here, you've got your help, which by and large echoes a lot of the individual links that you saw on the home page. Okay? And then, of course, you've got stuff for your profile where you can set some preferences for your UI. Okay, so that's kind of the overview of just the interface here. And I'm now going to get into the use case portion of it, and then we'll start digging into a few other things as well. Okay, so we've got about an hour left in this particular segment. And here's where you can start following along. So the use case that we're going to work on today is this, broadly speaking. And again, this is outlined in the document that we've shared with you. We've got an online subscription company that sells 3 different online packages, and they are called the Silver, Gold, and Platinum packages. And sometimes we give a discount when you buy that, and so we're going to have these point of sale or these transaction records where we're going to need to kind of figure out what we're selling. The goal of what we're trying to do is to get a view of by zip code, or postal code, if you will, excuse me. We're trying to do a zip code analysis across all of my transactions across multiple years. Who's buying what, where? That's what we want to understand, so we know where to focus our marketing efforts or where we need to go invest on doing some more promotion. Or, where's our 80-20? Where's our primary customers? Maybe we're going to do something special for them. But that's the goal. So the elements I'm looking at here are I've got transactional data that's going to need to get cleaned up. And I've got some customer data that's going to have some basic cleanup. But that's where my zip code information is coming from. And we're going to see how we do some basic cleanup of that data, enrichment of that data, and we'll be doing merging together of that data with both joins and unions. And then we'll create an aggregate and run that job and get an output. So that's the goal in the wash of what we're going to do. So to begin, and here's where we can, for those of you playing along at home, here's where we can get started. So the first thing we're going to do is create a flow. So if you're on the home screen, right, so let's just go there and go to the home screen, go ahead and click on Create Flow. Give the flow a name. Right. A little tip on the naming conventions here for the flow name and descriptions. This is also true for recipes as well. These are searchable, so be sharp in putting tags or descriptive keywords inside of the names and descriptions, because later on when your landscape has hundreds of different things in here, this will be very, very useful for you to kind of go back and draw from and find something quickly. In this case, we're going to go ahead and say create. And now notice that I'm in my canvas to create a flow canvas here. So that I know that because the icon up here says flows. I see the name of the flow that I just gave here. And of course, I can't do anything in here until I add some data, right? That's the cornerstone of everything. Again, going back to our process, we've created this flow, but again, we need to have some data in here. So we actually are starting our process here on step number 2, but we're going to go back and bring in some data. I'm going to show you some cool things around the options available to you there. So we'll click on Add Data Sets. And here I've got some data in my library. For those of you who, again, are coming in for the very first time, you won't see anything in here. So we need to go and get this data. So the data that we're going to go and derive is actually these data sets, but I'm going to show you where they came from so you have them available as well. So we're going to click on Import Data Sets to go into our Data Import Wizard. Now we're in our Import Data and Add to Flow Wizard. And it says add to flow because that was our point of entry. And so once we can get everything queued up, we'll see that these data sets will be thrown right back into our flow. So what we're going to do here, first of all, is I'll call out a couple of things. You could choose a file, and this means that the file is locally saved on your machine, and you can say choose a file, pick a directory, and pull from there. Or in this case, for our use case, we've got the data out here in an S3 bucket. Okay. Again, we're connected on Amazon in the backend here. So in this case, as I start clicking through here, notice this path is getting built. So S3 is the root, and then it's under Trifacta training datasets. Under that particular structure, please click on Wrangler Basic Training. And inside of Wrangler Basic Training, please click on these files. Lab 2010 transactions, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and lab customers. Okay, and as you do so, you're going to see that these things will start popping up here in the right-hand side. So the way that we kind of read this is, here's the source that you're pulling from. This top-level directory tells you where you are within that source. Here are the individual files there. And as you start clicking on them, they get lined up here in the queue on the right-hand side. Okay, so what do we have? We did up to 2012. Let's do 2013, 2014, 2015, and lab customers. Okay, so now I've got this data queued up. At this point, you can say import and add to flow because these are the files that we want to use. I'm going to take a moment to stay in here and show you a couple other things while we're here because I think they're really powerful and good to know. Inside the preview, you can see a quick overview of the data. This is not the entire data set. Again, it's just a sample. Okay. There's a couple other settings that you can do here to detect structure or remove special characters from column names. Typically, leaving detecting structure on is recommended. All right. The other thing is you can create a data set with parameters. So for example, let's say, because I said in our use case, we can look at all of our data, transaction data together. We're not really year specific for this particular analysis. I could bring in these data structures in a different way. And let me show you how that would work. Again, we'll keep these individual for now, but let's show you how this will work. I would, hovering over this particular file, I could click on the parameterize button. And notice that this takes me into a view that will allow me to parameterize the path. So here's the path that I'm working in, and here's the file that I've selected. What I can actually do is highlight one or multiple sections of the directory and the file name itself. And now it'll ask me, well, what do you want to parameterize it with? You can put in a datetime parameter. So let's say you have a file or the directory that has some kind of like timestamp structure. You can pass that in. You can add a variable. Maybe it's highly dynamic and you wanted to pass something in during runtime. Or you can just put a pattern parameter. And in this case, I'm just going to say it's a wildcard. I don't really care what's in that space. So when I do that, excuse me, notice that it brings these 6 files together. And if I say create, these 6 files will automatically be merged as one into one common data set. Now, 2 things I'll call out here. Number 1, key assumption is that those particular files, those 6 files, have the same structure. What I mean by that, right? Same column, number of columns, name of columns, position of columns, right? And the data types they match. The other thing is that within here, I probably want to give a description or a naming convention to this data set to let me know that this is a combined data set. I'm going to lose visibility to that. Somebody might come in here and say, oh, this is transactional data for 2010, some default name, and not realize it has additional data unless they inspect the data and see the timestamp in there. So be careful with your names, right, on how you use that. In this case, I just wanted to show you that that was an option for parameterization and some of the features in there. We have something similarly powerful when we go to something like regular database structure. In this case, we're not going to pull anything from Redshift, but I wanted to show you some options. Number 1, notice that, again, I click on my source on the left. Here's the directory. I'm under Redshift, public. Let's go down here to, click to is the table. Again, it's as easy as clicking on the table, and that entire table's data set is now available for me inside of my flow. But let's say, for example, I don't need that entire table, right? It's got multiple years of data or multiple regions. I need just like North America in 2010. right? That's what I need a subset. You could do create data set with SQL because this is a relational database source. So up here, you're taken into your SQL wizard, and I could literally put in a statement. I could say select star from click underscore to where region equals North America, and I don't know, date stamp equals, and I'm making up these names and fields all in, but the idea is that I'm doing a very generic SQL statement. The power of this is that I can literally put in a SQL statement whose syntax matches what is accepted by the system I'm pulling against. What I mean by that is, for example, this is Redshift. So the syntax that I would copy and paste in here or type into here has to be accepted by Redshift. In the same way that, like, Oracle SQL is different than SAP SQL, is slightly different than MySQL. Again, be syntax sensitive to what you're doing here. But once you have that in there, you would simply say validate SQL, and that entire output could then be used as a data source. Within here, you could do things like nested subselects. You could do where clauses, loops, all the standard things that you can do in this relational database, you can do here in this statement and use that entire output. It could be a 500-line, view, and put that in there as a starting point for then wrangling your data. The other cool thing that you can do if you don't want this to be so strict is you can actually parameterize this. I'm going to pass something in here. The name is going to be table name, right? The default value is click to, but if I save that and I say region, right? I'm going to put in a region value here. I'm also going to parameterize that. And I'm also going to parameterize year. So now this statement with the restrictions of region and the date stamp, assuming they're fields in that table, I could pass these in during runtime in an API. And this now becomes more dynamic for me as an output. Okay, so again, this allows you, again, from the standpoint of that data pipeline, you're building something specific as much as building structure. So again, there's some nuance here, but I just wanted to call this out. It's really powerful. In our case, we, again, don't need to pull from here, but it's a cool feature and I wanted to call it out. Let's get into one more thing I want to show you for creating a connection. Again, some of the things that you kind of get out of the box right there. Just click on new, you put in your credentials, and away you go. All right, well, let's get back to what we wanted to do. In our case, we wanted those data sets, right? So let's get rid of all of these, and I'm going to bring these now into our flow. So we'll say import and add to flow, which hopefully you've already done. And now they're going to get queued up and put into there for us. Okay, so now we're in our flow, again, back to the one we created, and notice that this was highlighted in dark blue, that has focus. And whatever's in dark blue, that's what you see, the information here on the details pane is germane to that item that has focus. So in this case, it's the recipe, or I'm sorry, the data set. You see the preview option and then a high-level overview of where it came from. If I click away from it, the canvas just kind of goes back to blank screen. Well, what we're going to do is get started in our lab customers data set. So what I want to do is, first of all, is build a recipe on here. And there's a couple ways I can do that. I can click on the item and I can say add new recipes from the details pane. I can notice next to it, if I click on those three little buttons there, the ellipses, it says add new recipe, or right next to it, there's that scroll icon for adding a new recipe. And since I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And now notice that it's taken to the top. It's called Lab Customers -2. And now I have the ability to go in and edit my recipe. So let's go ahead and do that and get into our transformation view. And this is where we'll actually end up spending most of our time in real life when you're actually working on your data sets. And I'll try, in the interest of time, I'll give you a kind of a high-level orientation as we work through this. So here is our grid view of the data. Very powerful, right? This is that very familiarized view that looks like Excel. I've got the ability to look as a grid. I can flip it to column view as well, which shows me three key elements. The first being the data type for a column, its name and its position, or the trifacta of how Trifacta looks at your data structures and does this kind of analysis and comparison. So these are three critical elements. I can click on a particular column, again, look at its details. There's different suggestions of what it thinks that you might want to do. There's a high-level data quality bar. Okay, I can do that over multiple columns as well. Right? If I choose these top three, notice my suggestions on the right-hand side change. Okay. I'm going to flip it back to grid view, much more information in here and interesting. So now we've got some functions in here, replace functions. Okay, we've got standardized functions as well, extracting functions. This is our menu bar that we're going across at the top here. And I won't belabor every one of these, but this is where you can kind of access the different groupings of functions. A few ones to call out though specifically are our formats. These are kind of those level 1 folders, those vanilla things that you might want to do here. Really cool one, create column from examples where you can simply type in what you want it to be for every unique value, and Trifacta will generate the code for you. Grouping, pivoting, unpivoting, converting values to columns, object and array functions, quite powerful as well. When you really start to do some of the advanced data manipulations and changes, you will kind of step into this. Proper filters on your data. There's logical filters that will have a net effect on the output of your data set. You've got a whole host of functions built in, okay, math functions, windows, logical functions, objects and arrays. Again, lots of different options for you here. You've got conditions, if then else structures, case statements. We've got joins, which we will use, unions, which we'll use. We can add comments, target matching, which is a really nice advanced feature that we have, which we can provide a sample schema of what you want your output to look like. And then it is then available for you to use as a kind of a guide to get to your output. And then macros, which we'll create one here in a minute as well. Other things that I'll call out at the top, this is the name of a flow that we were working in. And here's our full data, right? So in this case, because that sample size was very small, I'm looking at full data. If I wanted to create a new sample, it's as easy as clicking on samples and choosing what type of new sample I want to make. At this point, effectively, it would be the same as this read of data because I have no recipe steps in there. But this is how you create a new sample, and then you can choose to just click on it and employ it in your view. And ultimately, run job is the other cool thing that we'll do later on as well. But let's get into the use case because we want to do this hands-on. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do in our customer data set is notice that down here in the start date column, I have some missing start date values. And I know that if I have missing start dates, then that data is, this is a junk row of data. So I want to get rid of these. And the easiest way to do that is to use the data quality bar. And I can simply click on missing values, and it will highlight for me all of the rows with missing values based on that selection. And one of the first selections I have here on the right-hand side is to delete those rows. And notice down here in the lower left, my row counter, I've got 10,000 rows of data. So I actually do want to simply delete these rows of data. So I can say add. And what will happen is Trifacta will add a step into my recipe. Okay, so again, it was identify, interact, select. And that's the process by which you're going to start working with this data. The other thing that is happening here is notice that my start date is an incorrect pattern. This is being treated as a string because I have a couple entries in here that have the date as a short month name. So we want to change that into orient everything with a proper date format, in this case, year, month, and day. So an easy way to do that is this. So click on start date and go down here to where it says the patterns for that particular column and say show pattern details. This will take me into a view for the start date. And notice that as I've hovered over these two different segments of the patterns, they're blue. When you see this blue, it means that something in here is clickable. And what I want to do is I actually want to orient everything towards the year, month, day format. And you notice the suggestions on the right-hand side. Once I click here, these will change. So keep an eye on the right when I click here, and you should do the same as well. Again, those suggestions have changed. And I'm going to now close my column detail view so we can see what those suggestions will render when we hover over them. So in this one, the first one is keep rows. And that says, hey, keep those things that are in that match that pattern, but we would incorrectly get rid of legitimate data. So we don't want to do that. The next one is convert. If I click on that, notice that that preview comes into play and shows me that it will only make that change to the columns or the rows that are in error there. And that is indeed the option that we want. And the other validation is that you see it's now moved to datetime in terms of its format. I can go ahead and click Add. It's now added a second step to my recipe. And notice now start date, it's not missing anything, and it's in the proper format. The other thing that I'll call out here as we're building this out is the cursor, the index here of what I'm building in my recipe is moving. That dotted blue line shows me what point of execution I'm at with these steps. And the data that I'm looking at here is a result of everything above that line. The cool thing about this is I can see this in real time. I can click right before step 2 and say, hey, here's what it looked like before, and here's what it looked like after. So you can see precisely what that step does to your data. You can always click back to the very beginning as well. You can walk it through. The other thing that we'll call out here, end date. It's absolutely missing values, okay? And I want to put an end date value out there because it'll be important for us perhaps for a calculation later on. So in this case, I want to put in a default value of January 1, 2050. So an easy way to do that is to identify what's missing by clicking on the missing values. Now here, again, the suggestions are to delete, keep, create new column, or set. What we're going to do now is to utilize a function, but modify it in order to get the output that we want. So I'll do that by clicking on the set option, and notice that it's actually been, providing for us to set those missing values to null. Now, if I wanted to keep them null, I would simply say add, but I don't want to do that. I want to change that value. And I can do that by going into edit. And so now you see that we're taken into the edit with the function editor. And it's again, kind of like ordering on Amazon. Here's the function, the column that the name of the function, the column that or columns you're working on, and the formula for that function. In this case, it's the if missing function, and here's like if I click in the parentheses there, it'll show me what it's expecting the value and what to put in there if it's missing. So null is what it's inserting if it's missing. I don't want it to be null, so I can highlight just that component there and remove it and type in a value that I do want. And note, keep in mind as we do this, watch the preview there. It's not as I type in a single quote, be careful it puts in the ending quote for you. Just type in the value, 2050, January 1. And it puts it out there, again, the preview in real time, only in the places where that value is missing. No grouping or sorting is necessary, so we can make that change and simply say add. Okay. All right, so now we've got this file set up. Let's go back to our flow and start working on our other data sets. Okay. So we can do that by going to our flow name at the upper left and clicking here. This will take me back into this view. And what I'd like to do here is to build some steps here into my transaction data. So we're going to click on we'll start at 2010, and again, we'll say add new recipe, just like we did before. I'll simply click on it here, and we're going to go in here to edit the recipe. All right, let's take a quick inspection of what's going on here. Number one, I've got a customer ID, which aligns to that customer ID in my customer master. This will be important for us to bring in that zip code information later. I have a transaction date, again, everything up through 2010. I've got a ticket price. I've got a discount, which is actually being shown as a text, so I'm going to have to fix that. And I have some product information, which I'm going to have to sort out as well. Now, as I said, we need to actually do this over all of the different, we need to do this recipe step over all of the different data sets. So I'm going to show you a technique, or two different techniques of what to do here, okay? And let me just, as I clicked on here to expose my recipe, the first thing that I'll do is, let's say, for example, these ticket prices, the range that we're looking at here, these 1 cent transactions, I actually do not need them. So you can identify that subset of data by using the histogram here to click on that. And notice that only the 1 cent rows are highlighted. Because they're test transactions, I don't need them, so I can choose the delete rows option. So I'm going to say delete rows and click on add. And now those rows are gone, and that recipe step has been added for me. Okay. Let's go ahead and kind of change the product as well. Okay, so I'm going to use a case statement here to clean this up. Yeah, I could use if then else. There's multiple ways to do this, but a case statement would be most efficient. And in here, I have basic, I have deluxe, and I have platinum. So the naming convention's off by these two, and it's not in the proper case. So let's go ahead and fix that. Again, a way to identify or to get started here is to click on that particular histogram value to get into a function editor where we can modify that. So what we'll do is use the set function, and I'm going to go ahead and say edit. Okay. And in this case, the formula is to set this to null. I don't need any of this, so I'm going to blow away the entire formula. And here, what we can do is type in case. And again, the parentheses, it's going to take some square brackets, and it's now going to ask me, well, what are we going to examine here? And the way to call this is to put in the name of the column, in this case, product, right? And we're going to check to say if the product value equals something, notice the double equal sign there. If it equals basic, and this is case sensitive, then please set this to silver. And notice that it's doing that for basic, and I've got the silvers in there. Now, for the other cases, I could simply repeat that pattern by doing a comma and calling that out again. If product is equal to deluxe, then please set that to gold. And then my default value is going to be platinum, which were all the rest. And now we've realigned the case statement, or we've used the case statement to realign that and change the values inside the product column. So I'll go ahead and say add. Now, just in the interest of time, I'm going to do a quick step here to show you the availability and the capability of macros. Not something you need to do because we're going to use a different solution here and continue to build this out. But let me show you how this works. So let's say, for example, these two things I need to do across all of my other data sets. The reason for that is if I quickly jump into 2011, do a preview, you'll note that it also has the missing ticket, the 1 cent ticket price, and it also has the product in the incorrect formats. So I need to do this on 2011. It's going to be the same on 2012 all the way down. So one thing that I can do for macros is that, or a way that I can do that is to use macros. I'm going to go back into my edit recipe. And what I can do here within the recipe is I can click on all of these. And again, notice in the recipe itself, different menu steps to duplicate, copy. I could copy paste as well, but it's not going to be efficient. If I have 50 data sets, this is going to be a lot of copy pasting and a maintenance nightmare. The other side of this is, excuse me, I can create a macro. Okay? And by creating a macro, this encapsulates this logic and allows me to reapply it in multiple places. So I'll say create macro, and we'll give it a name. We'll call this transaction data macro, and I'm going to say next. And here it allows me to actually give a more meaningful or kind of a broader variable type name to the columns that are in particular play in each one of these steps. I don't have to parameterize them. And in this case, because the structures that this is working against are going to be exactly the same, it's fine. Okay. So I'm going to simply say create. And notice now that it's given me a message, replace those, and it zipped everything up into this thing called transaction data macro. Now what I could do is if I go into and notice I can jump along to different recipes by clicking on the second row here. This is my data set, and I can now look at the recipe list and jump back to lab customers. Right? I'm sorry, I actually wanted to go to a different place. So let me go back to my flow, and let's put a recipe on 2011. I apologize, I didn't have it. So let's go ahead and say edit recipe. And here in 2011, for example, instead of having to replicate those 2 steps or n number of steps that you might have, you can simply add a macro. You can say insert macro, choose the macro that you want, and align the columns. In this case, ticket price was the ticket price column we were working against. The product was the product column. And as soon as I do that, you notice that these 2 columns, it's showing me the new preview. 1 cent transactions are gone, and these things are converted to the proper case. I can say add, and in one step now I've been able to reapply that. The nice thing about a macro is that if you change it once, everywhere it's used, it also gets changed. So now in my library, that's how that macro got in there. We also have macros out there in our community under the Wrangle Exchange, and that's where that import macro capability comes in. I encourage you to look at that. In the interest of our kind of compressed time today, we don't have time to get into that. But I wanted you to see the structure of a macro and the reusability here. The other cool thing is, let's say, for example, the macro gets you 9/10 of the way there and you actually need to make a change. You can still do that. For example, I can go back into my 2011 transactions. And here, instead of saying it's just these 2 steps, I can click on this or use the menu option here and say, convert the macro to steps. And now it's unzipped that effectively, and it's added some comments in there. Shows me the start and the end of that macro. I could now come into here, I can add an additional step, I can modify this, whatever I needed to do. And now any changes here are decoupled from the changes that I would make to that root macro. So this is one cool technique of how to get some reusability on any logic that you build. Again, you're now utilizing more of that modular structure. Okay, and this kind of gets to that point where you're building a recipe and you realize that, hey, I can reuse it in different places in the flow. So again, we're kind of reinforcing that iterative model here. In our particular case, we're going to do a different technique altogether. So I'm going to get back into my flow and actually remove this particular recipe because I don't need it. And I can do that by just simply saying delete.
Will this be a good time for another question?
Yeah, please, a question.
This one more from the audience here. This may be a bit more open-ended, but the question is, how much data can Trifacta handle at a time without impacting performance?
Great question. Performance is always one of those nebulous things. In most organized, there's no silver bullet. Theoretically, there's no upper limit to our data processing capability, right? There's no hard limit size on how much it can handle. I will say that our best practices and kind of performance-oriented ideas are about the same things that we think of in terms of general analytics, parallelization, segmentation, also doing things in a more having abstraction layers that you can manage through, and that's also going to be predicated on the number of steps that you do. Like if we're working on the same amount of data and I can produce that output in 3/5 the number of steps that it takes someone else to do, I'm going to run that much faster. For overall processing time. It's also availability of system resources. So there's several factors that go into it, but yeah, I guess the core element of that question is how much data can it handle? There's no theoretical upper limit. Trifacta was built to run on extremely large data sets, so it's in its DNA. If there are particular use cases that you have in mind or particular challenges that you're looking for, by all means, reach out to us. We can help you, work through that, and we can look at that case in more detail.
Perfect, thank you.
Good questions. All right, let's get back into, if there are no others, let's get back into our transaction data, and let's continue to do something else, a couple other cleanup steps here. To get to that output. So let's go into our recipe. I'm actually going to go and just unzip this. Okay, so those were our first 2 steps. Now, as we saw, we need to do whatever we're going to be doing to this particular data set on all of them. So I'm going to actually show you a different technique, how to make this more efficient. We're going to actually union this data together as the very, very first step. Because, as I said, we can look at this data collectively over multiple years and then apply these steps, and that's a much more efficient process rather than a copy paste or putting macros everywhere. So what I can do is actually let me go and delete these 2 lines, the comment lines. So these are the first 2 steps that we did. You can click up now. Please again follow along and do these steps if you're following along at home. Click before row number 1 to get the data back to its original format. And here we're going to use the union option. And the union will take us into a particular wizard. So let's go ahead and click on that. But again, make sure your cursor is at before line number 1. We'll click on union. And in the union wizard, we see that the output of this are these 5 columns we're looking at. One data set is contributing to that output, and that data set is our 2010 transactions. What I want to do is I want to bring in those other data sets which have exactly the same structure. This is kind of like, putting away your silverware at home in the drawer. I'm aligning big forks, small forks, spoons, knives, right? I'm lining up based on the structure of the data. So I'm looking at the data type, I'm looking at the column name, and I'm looking at the column position. Again, that trifacta, it's that Rochambeau, right? The rock, paper, scissors. These 3 things are going to tell trifacta how to align these and identify, is this a fork, is it a spoon, is it a knife, and which slot does it go? So it's going to try to orient those files here horizontally. So how do we do that? So up here, there's an add data option. Please click on that. And within here now, in the this window, we want to choose the other data elements that we want to bring into this. And in our case, we're going to choose, we already have 2010, so we don't need to reselect that. But what we want is 2011, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Okay. And once we have that, say apply. Now what Trifacta is going to do here is, again, it's going to go through and do that, that rock, paper, scissors to see the alignment here based on those 3 critical elements. Let's give it a moment and see what it comes up with. Going through all the different files and doing that alignment. I get the feeling there's a lot of people on today. Systems running a touch slow. Wonderful. All right, so taking a look at our results here. Notice these are the data sets that we're working with. 2010 transaction, 11, 12, 13, all the way up to 15. Trifacta has identified that there's 5 out of the 5 columns in the union have lined up nicely based on the data type, the column name, and the column position. Again, column 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. There were no extraneous columns and nothing was dropped. Okay? You can also put in, you can put in an extra column in here if you wanted to put in some kind of value or to accommodate something else. But that's it. So it lines it across horizontally, and notice now that it says, hey, 6 data sets contribute to that particular output that you're going to see. Once we have this alignment, you can say add to recipe. And now it's going to apply that union. And again, remember, we're doing this as the very, very first step in our recipe. So the advantage here is that once that union is completed, notice that 107,680 rows in my total data set, I've got data spanning from 2010 all the way to 2015. All of that data has been now merged together. And if I go and look at my flow, that's how I get that structure in there. All of these things are being brought together in this recipe. So that's that union, right? So let's get back into edit recipe and now add the additional steps we need to do our analysis. So we did the union, and now we're going in and doing some of that cleanup. We deleted the extraneous rows. We cleaned up our product column. What we need to do is clean up discount so we can go through and create that actual transaction price, because in this case, a discount hasn't been applied here. And then we can get it into a position where we can get to that final analysis we were looking for. So in order to clean up discount, we need to turn this into an actual proper decimal. And there's a couple of ways that we can do this. Now the steps I'm going to show you, I think it's like 4 or 5 steps. There are ways to do it in 1 or 2 steps, or even 1 singular step. But the idea is, I'm just using this as an opportunity to show you some of the other functions and features and how you can work with this in different ways. And again, in the beginning, aim for accuracy. Don't worry about reducing your number of steps, especially with the data, the balances of data set is relatively small, so it's not going to be a huge performance impact for us. So the first thing we'll do is let's brush over this % character in order to get rid of it. So we just simply brush over it, and notice my suggestions come up. The very first one says replace, which is the function. And I should call that out. These are the functions that you see here in the dark text at the very top. That's effectively what you're calling them. So in this case, it's the replace function. And notice that it's using that backslash to indicate the special character. Trifacta uses what's called Trifacta script or regex, regular expressions format to identify some of the special characters and the notations in here. So those of you who are familiar, that you may have caught that. And you feel that being the case, feel free to use that more directly if you need to. So in our case, we're going to say replace and add that step, which is starting to move this in the right direction. At least it takes it to being an integer. Okay, so it adds that as step number 4. The very next thing that we're going to do is we actually want to set this up to produce this in a decimal format. So in this case, what I'm going to do is we'll say edit. There's an edit function, which I'll call directly, because I know that edit will produce that output of a column without creating a new column. So I'm going to say new step, and I'll type in the keyword edit, and what comes up is edit with formula. It's a pretty common one, pretty generic we can use. So in this case, we'll select the column that we want to do this on, which is the discount column. And the formula is going to be the column itself, discount, divided by 100. It now sets it up as 0.05 as a decimal. So that's looking good. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and say add, and add that as another step. That's step number 2 to kind of reorient this. Now I'm going to need to do a maths function in here, so I can't use a null, or I'm going to end up with an empty set in my calculation. So I need to actually put in a 0 value for null instead. And again, we've done this before where we've used the data quality bar to highlight a segment of the data we want to manipulate. So you can click in here into the missing values. And in this case, one of the options is to set those missing values to 0. Or you can call the set function directly and add that in. You again would identify the column discount where it's null and build in. But in our case, we've got the option there. So we'll go ahead and say add. And notice now that it's been set up. It's still treating it as an integer because the majority values are 0, and it sees this 0.05 as the mismatch type. But in fact, 0 could be simultaneously an integer or a decimal. So it's really no harm to leave that as mismatched, but a very easy way to change this data type if we want this to be super clean is to simply now click on the data type indicator itself and to choose to force this to be a decimal form. And that again adds that into my recipe step and cleans that up. And now I'm in a position where I can calculate my actual transaction price here. So I'll do that by calling a function, my multiplication function from within my function window. So I click on that, say math, and we'll say multiply. And here it's going to ask me, well, what factors do you want to multiply? Well, the first one is going to be, again, we're making references by column name, so it's going to be ticket price. And the second one is going to be discount, but because it's a fraction, it will be 1 minus discount. And it's going to create a new column called actual price. So we give it a name. And just for cleanliness, because we've got this repeating decimal value over here, here's an example of us kind of, rather than doing this in 2 steps, consolidating a function within a function. I'm going to use a round function in order to get this thing a little bit more aligned. So treating this entire entity here in the formula as one piece, I'm going to wrap this in the round function and say here's the first value, and the second portion of it is how many decimal places as digits. So here's a nested function. Multiply is nested inside the round. And a good way to read these are kind of inside out. That's what's happening first, and then this is what's happening next, et cetera, et cetera. And it's going to create that new price, actual price. So now I can say add. And now we're getting a step closer where we've been able to clean up our product naming convention. We've got an actual price. And now I can get on to bringing in that zip code information for my customer. So here we're going to go and do a proper join. Right? This, for those who are familiar with SQL, this is a SQL join. Okay, so ensuring that your cursor is after the last step that you just did, go ahead and click on join to open up that wizard. And here it's going to ask us, what data set would you like to join into what you're working on? And what we're working on is our transaction data. This is our data set that's going to be on the left side. What we're selecting here is the data set on the right side, right? And we're going to see that here visually in just a moment. What we're trying to bring in is indeed the customer data. So select that, notice the check mark, and say accept. Now here, I have the ability to structure how this join is going to work. The idea of this wizard is to give those who are not familiar with SQL a visual means to understand the logic of what's happening here. For those who are familiar, you're going to kind of see this broken out into a few different segments on how we're building this up. So the first thing is to select, or first identify here what we're looking at. So this is the customer ID, which Trifacta has identified is a unique field in both files and will serve as the means to join these data sets together, okay, because they are unique and they're individual. The orange indicates the left side data. This is our transaction data, and the green indicates the right side data, which is that customer file that we're bringing in. And it's saying, well, by default, the first is the inner join type, where it's going to return only matching rows. Well, we have to be careful that we're not going to remove any of our transaction data. So an inner join potentially would work, but there's also a small risk. In our case, because in inner join, it's also indicating here, here's what you have currently, 103,000 rows. If we did an inner join, we're still going to have 103,000 rows. This would potentially work because of the overlap of the data sets. However, on a larger scale data, there might be some risk to this. Okay? A right join will bring in all of my customer information and only my transaction data where a customer ID is in there. Again, theoretically, if my files are complete, this could potentially work, but the problem is that I'm at risk of dropping any transaction data that doesn't match a customer master. Maybe that's a context I want to look at that in, but that's not the one that we originally defined. We want to go based on, I want to bring in customers' zip codes, only those zip codes who've actually put in orders. So that being the case is the left join. The left join says keep all of my original transaction information, and again, only bring in customer zip codes for those customers who have placed orders coming from the right side. And you have other options, the outer and the cross join. In our case, the left join is indeed what we'll take. And again, here is the key that it's identified for us and the degree it's matched, 97%, and it's a suggested value. This is nice and tidy because it's one column from both files that gives you a key value. In the case that you have what's called multiple columns that are required to identify a row individually, aka a compound key, the way you can identify that is simply clicking on add. And here you would choose from your current data set, again, the left side, well, what column? Maybe it's a date value, right? So the transaction date. And in the data you're joining in, maybe that should align to the start date, okay? So this allows you to choose what additional columns need to come in as part of the key. The fuzzy match is akin to a like statement in SQL. Ignore the case, ignore special characters, ignore white space. These are all options for you, okay? In this particular scenario, we don't need that. So I'll just say cancel, but I wanted to show you this wizard in the event that you do have a compound key. Again, we've defined our join type, we've identified the key. Now let's move to the next step. This is now asking me to define what do I want in my output. These are the key fields, again, orange being what I already have, my transaction data, green coming in from the customer file. In my case, I can keep one customer ID. I know these things match because of the nature of the join I'm doing. I don't really need the transaction date. I actually only want the actual ticket price, so I don't need these columns either. And I want the product name. Okay. Now, coming from the right side, which is the customer master, really the only thing I'm going against is the zip code. So let's just grab that. As a matter of fact, I really don't even need the customer ID because the nature of the analysis, I'm not tying it to a customer ID. I'm doing it by zip code and product. Those are my key lenses. So I actually don't even need the key in there. So let's keep it very, very trim. These are the three columns that I need. Okay. So I've identified those in my output, and I'm going to say review. This is that final check. Are you sure you want to place this order? Yep, I like it. Everything's good. If I need to make any final changes, I can do edit and then say add to recipe. All right, now we're at a point where we can set this up to do that final analysis. Here, I'm now looking at the actual price, the product, and the address, zip code. I'm going to make a pivot table to get it in that format that I was looking for. Okay, is my next step. So I'm going to go ahead and click on pivot. And it's going to say, well, at the column level, what do you want to see? I'd like this broken out by product. I'd like to see across, silver, gold, and platinum. So I select my product column. And as I start making these selections on the bottom half of the screen here, you're going to see that Trifacta is starting to build out that preview. Again, this is the structure, but I haven't any rows of data because I haven't defined any calculations yet. Okay? The row label, I want to break this out by the zip code. So I'll select that. And now it's kind of building the grid for me by zip code. Here's what's going on. Now I need to put in the actual values that I'm calculating. So let's put in a count of, as a function to say how many actual things were sold there in this zip code for gold, for platinum, and silver. And I can hit tab to add an additional value. Maybe I'm going to do a sum of my actual price. So this is going to give me aggregate value of this tells me the number of things sold, and this tells me the value of things sold. So now this is in a closer format to what I might send up to some kind of reporting or dashboarding tool, because it's a nice, aggregate view, and it's very easy to put this into like a bar chart or like some trend lines or something like that. Especially if I start doing this over time. So this is all I need to do to set up that pivot, and I would simply say add. Okay. I'm going to do add. There we go. And notice now I'm down to about 3,800 rows, and I've got that final view. Now, in our case, we are looking at the full data, so this is the output, right? This is the output that we can expect. But in most cases, you're going to be working on larger data sets. So we want now Trifacta to go and run this, to generate that output, which is that step to run everything across that full data set. Okay, so now we built that recipe. We're now the generate output option. So in order to do that, we would say run job. And here, it's going to ask us some of the options that we want to do. First and foremost, if you want to see those profiles that are very, very powerful in the end, you turn on this checkbox, profile results, when you define a job. This is optional for you. You do not need to have this on. This adds a little bit of extra overhead to your final processing. So if it's something you're just trying to build up and create into a file and just kind of run through for a logical test, and you don't need the profile per se, don't turn it on. But if you want it, please keep it checked. By default, there's a publishing action built in here to create a CSV output, but let's add a new one from scratch so you can kind of see some of the options there. So in this case, first of all, I would say, when I said add a publishing action, where do you want to put it? In this case, we'll keep it in S3. You can edit the path. You can maybe make this dynamic. Maybe you can change the folder. Maybe there's a dedicated output one. So here we're defining where it's going to go, or what system it's going into, where it's going, and then the name for it. And so in order to do that, we'll say create a new file. And here are some of our options. We can produce a name in here and to say transaction data output underscore, and maybe we're going to put a timestamp on there. So I can choose parameterized destination, and I can maybe pass in a variable, so I can give it some kind of naming convention each time, or I can add a timestamp parameter, say the time the exact job started. Okay, so let's put that on there as well. And here's an option of what format do you want. Again, this is our test system, so we've got just these in here, but CSV is fine. Create a new file every run, or replace the file every run. In this case, a replace would not overwrite it because we have a timestamp in there. Okay, but in our case, create a new file every run, and you've got some additional options in here as well. But these are the core things that you can do, and they're going to be germane to the type of file that you're creating. For example, if you're doing a hyper file, you're not going to have those additional options in there. And maybe it's a JSON file. Okay. In any case, I'm not going to add this. I just wanted to show you the steps involved in some of the options you had in here. So in our case, we've got CSV, we got profile turned on, and now we can say run job. So this is the run job that we're doing here is an ad hoc on-demand running of the job. We haven't built this into any schedule yet. Okay. So once we did run job, you see that the transformation steps, which is the logic that we built, has been completed, and now is the actual writing out of that file into that location. And this, once completed, will take us into our validation, which allows us to look at that profile and see where everything is. So that job has been completed. I can jump into it directly by clicking on the job here. And notice now that we're in that job summary page. Okay. Here's that output destination. On the overview page, you'll see that there's a lot of information for us. Kind of going through this again. These are the stages that have been completed, transforming with the profiling, and then publishing. There are occasions where this portion will complete properly and something might go errant with the publishing. Maybe the system resource is locked, or maybe there was a problem in transmission of the file. But these things are separated out. Okay, so keep that in mind when you're looking at this. In addition, you've got, again, that unique ID, its overall status, which flow it came from, which output, and again, you can jump into these directly. And the job type, this is manual versus scheduled, right? So again, this was an ad hoc one that we did, and some high-level information on it. Also the environment that this was run on. Because it was small enough, it was on Photon there. The output destinations, this is the name of the file, and here's the location where it is. And again, I can click on this to download it directly to my machine. This is the profile of that data, and this is really where the magic is. And again, right now, relatively small data set for us, but it tells me that, hey, I've got some mismatched values in my actual price gold. Maybe I need to go in there and add a round function for that column to clean that up, just to keep it tidy. But I don't have any missing data, which is good. This becomes especially powerful as I have hundreds of columns across. You're going to get very, very powerful profiling here. You've got your bell curve distribution in here of the counts of values within there, or the value ranges, and kind of where things are. So outliers, of course, will be interesting, for zip codes. These guys. So I've got maybe 5 that are my, or 3 or 4 that are my, top producers here. And that was one of the things that we had talked about in use case. Where are my major sales coming from across 5 years? So it's very powerful to see. Again, the dependencies, the overview of what's going into producing that output, and you see that output is indicated by the arrow pointing to that little square up there. That's an output. They're letting me know that there's an output available here. And then again, just an enumeration of the data sources that went into producing this. Okay. Let's go back into our flow for a second. I want to show you a couple other options here. Right, and at this point, what we've done is we've validated our results. So we've completed that pipeline end to end. I'm going to show you some ways to extend this and get some extra benefit out of this in the couple minutes we have left. So one of these things is we've produced here an actual output that is stored as a file. But what if I just need this as a logical thing? I don't need a real file for it, but I want to use this output as a starting point for something else. Right? Maybe we're going to have multiple campaigns. Different people in different regions are going to take their state zip code and do something different with it. What I can do is create, instead of having to redo this and rebuild this multiple times, I mean, everyone could potentially source from that output, right? Or you can do what's called a reference data set. And notice that chain link icon, and it's given a name, Lab 2010 transactions. Okay. What I could do here, and I'll show you how I can use this later on. Okay, I want to do one more step over here, just so for one more thing I want to show you. I'm going to create an output here. Okay. Create an output to run just on lab customers. And we just did those 3 steps, but I want this additional output here as well. So getting back to this reference data set, here's a way in which I could use that. I could go into a new flow. And now, as my data set starting point, I can choose that reference data set. The value of this is that when I start from here, notice the blue line to the left of this data source. It's not, in our prior one, they were all kind of listed here on the left and it started there. Any recipe steps that I build in here on this particular reference data set, Trifacta will realize that in order for me to start work on this, any logic that I have in here, whatever is producing this, I need to go and dynamically run that first in order to bring it up to the starting line here and then carry that forward. So it's a dynamic reference. It's another way to think about it is it will go and run whatever process to bring you that data in real time for the purposes of when you run this flow. But it allows you to segment it at the flow level. But you can use data sets that will reach in, these reference data sets reach into other flows. Okay. It's one option for you. So that's the value of a reference data set. And again, that shows up in your library. So multiple people can use that. And this again speaks to a little bit of our abstraction layers on how we can build things out and do them in parallel, or use components and build upon them. Another thing that you can do is use plans to build these pipelines. And again, in this test plan, we had one where we ran that training example. And here now, I want to schedule the flows to run at a high level. I can add additional flows to string these together. So maybe it's the training example, and then the one that we did today. I want you to do the customer's output. Okay, and I actually want you to do that output as well. So I'm going to have multiple outputs when that runs. And then maybe I'm going to add one more if there's an output here. Here. Maybe it's going to run it again. So it allows me to put these flows together. And then at the very top, I can create a schedule for that flow to run at a particular time or some other type of trigger. Okay. And from a webhook or an API. So this is how I can start building together a pipeline with using the flow as my granular layer. Again, and all of this information that I've shared with you, we've got tons of documentation and help available to you on our community page, and also our friends at PM Square are well-versed and experts in this as well. So we're here to help you. Please reach out. That takes me to the end of my segment for time, and thank you for your attention and your interest in this today. I'll turn it back over to you, PM Square.
Thank you very much, Bipul. If you don't mind sticking around, we do have a couple of questions from the audience that I might pose to you. And if anyone else watching right now and participating has additional questions, feel free to enter those into the question dialog on your browser there. So the first question that we had from the audience was, can Trifacta write output to a database?
Yes. We have relational write back.
Okay. And the second question was, can Trifacta use data from the internet, like from an FTP site or an API source?
Yes, absolutely. We've got REST things that you can use, DP servers, different file sources. I think there's a way to plug in RSS feeds through one of the APIs in there. So yeah, all available to you.
Excellent. And one last more logistical question. How long after the Bacon Trifacta will the training be available?
Training is available today, as a matter of fact, for free. If you go to our community site, community.trifacta.com, register for free. Once you've done that, you'll be able to log in. There's a tab on there called Trifacta Academy. Within Trifacta Academy, we have guided learning pathways. So you're going to find this use case as well as others, and you can use this test environment. And just, it's sample data, everything's in there step by step. So there's different modules that will expose you to, again, more foundational basic things to some of the more advanced things, and they'll culminate in a certification that you can take. Those are also completely free. We have 2 levels of certifications presently. The first level is the Wrangler, which is kind of level 1. Again, kind of the more broad strokes, getting used to the system, where things are at, core basic functionality, similar to what I've showed you today, and maybe a few other items in there as well. And then once you've achieved that, gotten some other, maybe some time on it a little bit, there's an advanced training level, it's called the Knight certification pathway, and that's level 2. And that will get you into things like the target matching, or using arrays and and objects and things like that. So some of the more advanced functionality. Again, all of that is available inside of Trifacta Academy. Just search for those keywords, Wrangler and Knight. In addition, there's other kind of like, challenges and use cases to kind of show you other tips and techniques as well. I know our training team has done a fantastic job of updating it recently, and we're doing a new release soon, if not already being out there with kind of the new interface and things around plans and additional capabilities. So please keep near to that, but it's all available through community, and it's available right now.
Great. Yeah, and I'll echo that. The Trifacta training site is incredibly easy to use, and the training has been very well structured. I myself have been through the Wrangler and Knight training, and it was very seamless and easy to understand. We have one last question from the audience. Before I get to that, I'll also mention in regards to the training, today's session, both the video recording and the Trifacta presentation from yesterday will be made available after the conference. We'll be sending out a post-conference email along with our survey, so be sure to check that out if you want to revisit anything that Vipul showed today. One last question from the audience, and then we'll move on to our lunch break. And I believe I know the answer to this, but I'll let you answer, Vipul. Can you append data on a monthly basis?
Yes, that would be defined really in your job output in terms of how you add that to your, like an existing data set, and you would simply schedule that job or that flow to run at a monthly time interval.
Great. Thank you very much for your time, Vipul. The workshop was incredibly informative, and I know I enjoyed watching it, and I'm sure that many of the people that are new to Trifacta have gained a lot of information out of that as well. So thank you for your time.